I'm Jacqueline. Sitting in that emergency executive meeting, I watched as the room fell into a deathly silence. The CEO, Mr. Thompson, had just asked a question that hung in the air like a dark cloud. Gwen, have you reviewed the withdrawal clauses in these contracts? Gwen, the vice president of global procurement at Montgomery Industries, paled visibly. Her eyes darted around the room, and I could see the realization dawn on her face. She had walked into a trap of her own making. It all started 15 years ago, when I was a young college student. My father, a hard, working, and honest man, was a senior consultant at a small firm. He had spent 20 years building relationships across Asia, bringing in a significant portion of the company's international revenue. But then, Gwen, who was working for a larger corporation at the time, orchestrated the acquisition of my father's firm. Gwen was a shark in a corporate suit. She was cold, calculating, and had no regard for the people whose lives she destroyed. She systematically undermined my father. In meetings, she questioned his reports, spread rumors about his competence, and reassigned his clients to younger, less experienced staff. My father, who had always been a pillar of integrity, began to doubt himself. He would come home every night, exhausted and defeated. One morning, I found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by termination papers and bills he couldn't pay. His heart had given out under the stress. That was the day I vowed to make Gwen pay for what she had done. I studied business, specializing in international supply chain management. I spent 8 years working for smaller companies, learning every aspect of global procurement. When a position opened up at Montgomery Industries and I saw Gwen's name as the hiring manager, I knew it was my chance. I took the job and became the model employee. I was enthusiastic, hard working, and always willing to go the extra mile. For 18 months, I built relationships with suppliers from all over the world. There was Hiroshi Tanaka from Tokyo. His family's electronics business had been on the verge of bankruptcy after a major competitor stole their technology. I also connected with the Ivanov family in Russia. They had started a packaging company after fleeing political unrest, using their life savings to get it off the ground. And then there was Carlos Gomez in Brazil, who was trying to expand his precision tooling business to meet international demands. While I was building these relationships, I was also researching Gwen's past. I discovered that she had a long history of destroying the careers of others. She had fired a talented marketing manager in Singapore, claiming underperformance, only to hire a more expensive replacement. She had forced a small manufacturing firm in Italy into bankruptcy, then acquired their assets at a fraction of their value. I started sharing stories with my suppliers about the warning signs of dealing with corporate predators. I never mentioned Gwen's name, but I made sure they understood the importance of protecting themselves. By the 12th month, every contract I negotiated included specific clauses about notification periods, penalty structures, and coordinated withdrawal rights. Gwen signed these contracts without a second thought, focused only on the cost savings I was delivering. Montgomery Industries' profit margins soared by 40% in the first year, largely thanks to the relationships I had built. But then, one fateful Tuesday morning, I went to Gwen's office for what I thought was a routine quarterly review. Montgomery had just announced record profits, driven by the international partnerships I had developed. I was expecting recognition and maybe a promotion. Instead, Gwen pulled up her computer and started explaining how the company was shifting to domestic suppliers. "These foreign contracts are too complicated," she said, scrolling through the list of partnerships I had spent months cultivating. "Too much hand-holding. Too many cultural sensitivities to manage. We need suppliers who understand American business practices." I watched in horror as she canceled Hiroshi's electronics contract, worth $2.5 million annually. The Ivanov's packaging deal, 18 months in the making, was terminated. Carlos Precision Components, essential for Montgomery's automotive division, were eliminated. "Gwen," I said carefully, "these suppliers provide components we can't source domestically. The Ivanov's packaging materials have unique properties that American manufacturers can't match. Carlos Tooling Precision is beyond anything available in our price range." She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Jacqueline, you're thinking like a relationship counselor instead of a business professional. We don't need their sob stories about family businesses and cultural traditions. We need products delivered on schedule at competitive prices. There are plenty of American suppliers who can provide what we need without all the emotional complexity. That phrase, emotional complexity, hit me like a punch in the gut. It was the same dismissive language she had used 15 years ago when destroying my father. I realized that she hadn't changed at all. What about the penalty clauses? I asked quietly. Gwen waved her hand dismissively. Legal will handle whatever paperwork needs to be filed. These people should be grateful. They got 18 months of business from us. Most international suppliers never get opportunities like this. Then she said the 7 words that changed everything. We don't need your foreign connections anymore. I nodded slowly, thanked her for the feedback, and walked out of her office. Instead of going back to my desk, I went to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and started making calls. I called Hiroshi first. It was late at night in Tokyo, but he answered on the second ring. Hiroshi, this is Jacqueline from Montgomery. I need you to listen very carefully and then make some calls of your own. Within 6 hours, every supplier I had partnered with over 18 months had received the same message. The network I had built was not just about business. It was about shared experiences and mutual protection. Hiroshi called the Ivanovs in Russia. The Ivanovs reached out to Carlos in Brazil. Carlos contacted suppliers in South Korea. And like a chain reaction, suppliers across 12 countries started reviewing their Montgomery contracts. By Thursday morning, Montgomery's production floor was silent. 70% of their critical components stopped arriving. The precision electronics from Hiroshi's factory, the specialty packaging from the Ivanovs, and the high-precision tools from Carlos' workshop were all gone. Operations managers were panicking, making frantic calls to suppliers who calmly explained that they were exercising their contractual withdrawal rights. By noon, manufacturing supervisors were in emergency meetings, trying to understand how Montgomery had become so dependent on international suppliers they now claimed they didn't need. Gwen spent Thursday afternoon in crisis management mode, calling domestic suppliers who quoted prices 3 times higher than our international partners, with delivery timelines stretching into the next quarter. On Friday, Montgomery's biggest client, a defense contractor, called to express concerns about production delays. Then an automotive company that relied on Montgomery's precision parts started asking about alternative suppliers. I spent the whole week documenting everything, from the operational chaos to Gwen's responses. She dismissed the suppliers as overreacting, insisting that international partners were inherently unreliable. On Monday morning, Mr. Thompson called an emergency executive meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there, but he specifically requested my presence because I was the only one who fully understood Montgomery's international supplier relationships. Gwen looked confused when I walked in, probably thinking I would be blamed for the crisis. Mr. Thompson started the meeting with a simple question. Can someone explain to me how we went from record profits to production shutdown in 4 days? Gwen launched into a polished presentation about supply chain diversification and the benefits of domestic sourcing. She had slides showing cost projections and risk assessments, claiming that eliminating international suppliers was a sound business strategy. Mr. Thompson listened patiently, then turned to me. Jacqueline, you built these relationships. Help me understand what actually happened here. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I opened my laptop and pulled up the presentation I had been working on since Tuesday. Mr. Thompson, with your permission, I'd like to show you exactly who our international suppliers are and what our relationships with them actually meant. I showed him pictures of Hiroshi's factory, the Ivanov's packaging plant, and Carlos' workshop. I explained how each supplier had restructured their operations to meet Montgomery's needs, hiring new workers and investing in new equipment. I also showed him the financial impact. The contracts we had voided represented partnerships worth $50 million annually, with suppliers who had been growing at an average of 20% year over year. These partnerships weren't expendable overhead, I said. They were competitive advantages that our domestic competitors don't have access to. We were getting high-quality components at lower prices because these suppliers trusted us. As I spoke, I watched Gwen's face turn from confusion to concern. Mr. Thompson started asking pointed questions about the termination decisions. Why hadn't she consulted with operations? Why hadn't she understood the coordinated withdrawal clauses? Then I showed him the final section of my presentation, the documentation of each supplier's previous experiences with American companies. I explained how they had been burned before, but had still trusted Montgomery because of me. Mr. Thompson was silent for a few minutes, studying the financial projections and supplier profiles. Finally, he looked at Gwen with disappointment. Gwen, help me understand the strategic thinking behind eliminating $50 million in annual revenue without consulting operations, finance, or the executive team. Gwen started to explain about domestic sourcing and simplified logistics, but her voice wavered. She kept using phrases like "these people" and "cultural complications," which sounded more and more out of place. Mr. Thompson asked, "What cultural complications?" Jacqueline's documentation suggests these suppliers were consistently exceeding quality standards and delivery requirements. Gwen replied, "The language barriers, the time zone difficulties, the constant need for relationship management. International suppliers require so much hand-holding compared to domestic partners." That's when Mr. Thompson asked the question that sealed Gwen's fate. "Gwen, have you reviewed the withdrawal clauses in these contracts?" Silence filled the room. Gwen's face turned pale as she realized the gravity of her mistake. "Mr. Thompson, I trusted that legal had reviewed these contracts appropriately. The withdrawal clauses seemed like standard protective language," she said. "Standard protective language," Mr. Thompson repeated slowly. "Gwen, these clauses exist to prevent companies from treating international suppliers as expendable. They're designed to ensure that partnerships are honored." I watched as Gwen realized that she had been outsmarted. "Jacqueline," Mr. Thompson said, turning to me, "in your assessment, is there any possibility of rebuilding these partnerships?" I took a deep breath. "Mr. Thompson, I spent Friday reaching out to our former suppliers. They're willing to consider future relationships with Montgomery, but only under one condition." "What condition?" he asked. "They require a written guarantee that Gwen will have no involvement in international supplier relationships going forward." The room went dead silent. Gwen stared at me in disbelief. "They what?" she whispered. I looked at her calmly. "I'm sorry, Gwen, but I have to be honest. Multiple suppliers specifically mentioned feeling disrespected during previous interactions with you. They cited comments about their English skills, dismissive attitudes toward their business practices, and cultural insensitivity." I pulled up my laptop and showed Mr. Thompson the written responses from our former partners. Hiroshi's letter was particularly damning. Ms. Reed's approach to international partnerships shows a fundamental misunderstanding of mutual respect. Her comments about foreign complications suggest Montgomery views international suppliers as problematic. One by one, I shared the feedback from suppliers across the continents. Mr. Thompson spent the next hour reviewing the documentation, asking detailed questions about rebuilding possibilities and domestic sourcing alternatives. Finally, he closed his laptop and looked at Gwen. "I need some time to review the situation with the board. Jacqueline, can you provide me with comprehensive documentation of our international supplier relationships and the feedback on rebuilding possibilities?" "Of course, Mr. Thompson." "Gwen, I'll need you to prepare a detailed report explaining the strategic reasoning behind these termination decisions and your assessment of domestic sourcing alternatives." After the meeting, Gwen cornered me by the elevator. "Jacqueline, what exactly did you tell these suppliers about me?" I looked at her with the same calm I had maintained throughout the presentation. "I told them the truth, Gwen. I shared your exact words about not needing foreign connections anymore." She started to protest. "That's not. I didn't mean." I interrupted her. "You didn't mean what? That you don't value international partnerships? That cultural sensitivity is unnecessary? That relationship management is emotional complexity we can't afford." She stared at me, finally realizing the consequences of her actions. Those suppliers trusted Montgomery because they trusted me. When you terminated their contracts while calling their work foreign complications, you destroyed relationships that took 18 months to build. They're not angry, Gwen. They're protecting themselves. The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside. Just before the doors closed, I said, "Sometimes the people you consider dispensable turn out to be the ones holding everything together." 3 weeks later, Mr. Thompson announced that Montgomery was restructuring its procurement division. Gwen was transitioning to a customer service role, where her domestic focus would be better utilized. I was promoted to Director of Global Supplier Relations, with full authority to rebuild the international partnerships Montgomery had lost. It took 6 months to restore relationships with most of our former suppliers. They needed proof that Montgomery had learned from its mistakes. They wanted guarantees, oversight structures, and cultural sensitivity training for all executive staff involved in international partnerships. Gwen lasted 9 months in customer service before transferring to a smaller company. I heard that she now handles complaint calls for a local distribution center, dealing with frustrated customers every day. I never told anyone about my father or the real reason I had joined Montgomery. The revenge wasn't about exposing her past. It was about letting her experience the consequences of her own choices. And in the end, I knew that she finally understood what my father had felt in those last months of his life.